Requiem aeternam, dona ei Domine, et lux perpetua, luceat ei, et fiescat in pace. Anima eius, et anima omnium fidelium, per misericordiam Dei, et fiescat.
With the death of his brother, Beethoven's emotional life changed forever. The composer's final years were to be dominated by his battle with his sister-in-law Johanna for possession of his young nephew. At 45, his hearing deteriorating, he retreated into a more exclusively private world, which represented the one period of creative silence in his mature career. The astonishing body of work from Beethoven's last decade was still to come, works of unsurpassed vision and complexity, like the Ninth Symphony, the late string quartets, and the Missa Solemnis. But for the next 2 years, Europe's most famous and celebrated composer would produce almost no new music. The catastrophe of his deafness had already robbed him of his life as a performing musician. For the moment, his creative energy and passion, his faith and aspiration would all be devoted to his 9-year-old nephew, Carl van Beethoven.
The piano was as mute as he was deaf. And he was deaf to all reason but his own regarding his nephew.
But your brother's request was that you and Johanna should bring up the boy together.
No, she made my brother do that. When he was on his deathbed, Stefan. The woman's morally unfit. Morally unfit to be a mother.
Ludwig, you're in no position.
What did you? Drunk? No, I will inspire my nephew with industry and virtue after my own example. No? There's nothing more sacred than the care of a child.
I couldn't help remembering the lonely little boy I'd known back in Bonn. Ludwig's mother did so little to protect him. And now he became absolutely possessed with the notion of becoming a father himself. There was something innocent, but also desperate about it. And when he took his case to court, well, Vienna's greatest composer against poor Johanna.
The Imperial and Royal Landrecht of the Empire of Austria confers sole guardianship of the minor son Karl upon his uncle, Herr Ludwig van Beethoven.
You have won the day, my boy. Te Deum. Laudamus.
It took him years to forgive me for not supporting him. But I knew that his love for Karl, and he really did love the boy, it would demand too much. Beethoven hadn't found happiness with an adult. Now, what chance did a little boy have of living up to the expectations of a man like Ludwig?
Chattering in class when you should be paying attention to your lessons. Neglecting your piano practice. What's achieved in life without diligence?
Nothing.
Nothing. What's the matter with you?
Oh, for God's sake, woman! Not now!
Why are you sad?
I make you ashamed. And I'm ashamed of myself.
I am going to rid you of your mother's poison.
Coffee now?
For God's sakes, woman, not now.
My precious boy. A trouser button?
I always felt he wanted to be not just a father to the boy, but his everything, his whole world. And for a while, this little family that he had created, this father and son, well, it was Ludwig's whole world.
All the creative zeal and uncompromising commitment of Beethoven the composer was now expressed in Beethoven the parent. There were no half measures. Nothing could soften his hostility to Karl's mother or temper his fanatical devotion to what he considered his moral duty as loving father to a young human spirit.
We must sort this out.
Without that woman's influence, he'll be a better man.
We'll look at the laundry lists later.
He's happier now, isn't he? Hmm?
You've been out for 2 hours. Don't tell me you've been to school. I know you haven't been to school. You've been to see... You were seen! You haven't been in school. You've been to see your mother. Yes, you've been to see your mother. Don't lie! Don't lie to me! You're my son! You're my son! You're not her son! You're my son! You're my son! Mine!
Karl? Karl? Oh, Karl. Oh, my God.
Unable to recognize boundaries or the limits of reasonable behavior, Beethoven was on the edge of emotional breakdown. Such a crisis might reasonably precipitate disintegration, but in Beethoven's case, extreme crisis led to quantum creative leaps.
15 years earlier, the Eroica Symphony had emerged from the devastation of his deafness, and now, with a level of personal despair even higher than that, Beethoven broke the silence of the last 2 years with the greatest of all his piano sonatas, the Hammerklavier.
This is a monster of a piece, using every inch of the keyboard and wresting every bit of expressive possibility out of the instrument. It makes technical demands far beyond anything pianists had encountered before. The forte piano, pointedly given its German name, Hammerklavier, is no longer just an expressive tool. but an almost machine-like challenge to the human performer. There's a rigorous intellect at work here, a new sense of both integration and creative freedom, hallmarks of Beethoven's late style. And from this astonishingly assured and ambitious work, it becomes clear that Beethoven's period of low production wasn't in any way a creative slowdown. In fact, while dealing with the intense moral and practical demands of fatherhood, Beethoven was concluding a spectacular creative metamorphosis. From now on, the challenges that he set himself, his musical and ideological aspirations, far surpassed anything of his earlier years.
He was in despair when Karl ran away. I didn't think things could get any worse. They did. Johanna took him back to court.
Karl? Why did you run away from your uncle? Why? Has your uncle ever mistreated you?
He has often had to punish me, and I've always deserved it.
What's interesting here, I think, is that the more Beethoven confronts the law, the more his music becomes about rules, how to twist them, bend them, break them. The last movement of the Hammerklavier Sonata is really a huge fugue, the most rule-bound of all compositional forms, literally a musical straitjacket. And this fugue is one of the most ambitious and complicated ever written. A fugue is built from a single theme, and here Beethoven's theme is so complicated that it is, in itself, a challenge to any composer. Its big leap, trill, and series of helter-skelter notes make it very distinctive, so that every time this theme appears, it's easy to recognize. As the piece develops, Beethoven uses every conceivable fugal device, literally every trick in the book. He more than lives up to his great model, J.S. Bach. But what makes this fugue so extraordinary is the way Beethoven contrasts the strict discipline of the form with an excessive, almost anarchic sense of freedom. Again, there are no borders, no limits. Anything might happen.
Then when I heard she had taken a secret lover and was displaying herself on immodest dance floors throughout Vienna,
my only concern is for my little boy's soul.
I was advised that Beethoven is greatly neglecting my son's physical and moral upbringing.
In this fugue, the sheer intellectual display is astonishing. He creates more rules than are necessary, deliberately placing obstacles and challenges in his own path. At one point, he even turns his theme backwards.
It is no secret that my brother-in-law is deaf. My son cannot even speak to him.
I have often asked him if he's fond of his mother, and he's always responded in the negative.
And disrupts it to the point that it almost disintegrates. But the inexorable thrust of fugue holds it together. By constantly disrupting and fragmenting the rules, Beethoven is creating a logic of disintegration rather than integration, which makes the music more and more compulsive. You can hear him trying to pull everything together and succeeding.
I've nothing to gain except for recognizing in myself the man who gave my son a better human nature.
Herr Ludwig van Beethoven is to be appointed guardian of the said minor Carl van Beethoven, to the complete exclusion of the mother.
So, he finally had the boy. And Johanna went on to have another baby, Ludovica. There was some question over who the father was, and Ludwig felt that proved his case against her once and for all. Carl seemed not to miss her anymore after the baby was born. And he was soon sent back to boarding school.
God sees into our hearts and our conscience. And He knows that I perform all of the duties required of me by humanity, God, and nature.
Beethoven was religious inwardly. He didn't attend church. His theories weren't based on any church dogmas or ritual. They were revealed to him by nature herself. He recognized God in the world, and the world in God.
From what we can see of God's work, we can conclude that He is present in every part of space.
Ask his girl to deal with this, will you? So, these powders 6 times daily and 6 bowls of the tea. If the powders don't work, we'll try another enema.
One day this'll be the end of me.
Oh, come on. We'll put that day off for a long time yet.
It's a bad man who doesn't know how to die. I've known that since I was a boy of 15. My only regret is that I've done so little for art.
Ludwig, as far as all that's concerned, forgive me, but you could leave us today.
I do have some very different things in mind.
Beethoven's new focus on a very personal spirituality coincided with the elevation of his royal patron, Archduke Rudolf, to the position of Archbishop. Rudolf represented the old, enlightened regime of his uncle, Emperor Joseph II, a lost golden age compared to the repressive order of modern Vienna. And for Beethoven, Rudolf's forthcoming enthronement represented a profound personal opportunity.
Your Highness, Ludwig.
If a mass composed by me is performed at the ceremony,
then it'll be the most glorious day of my life. But I must be able to use your library day or night. True church music. What is that? Well, the older composers, only Sebastian Bach and Handel, had what we might call genius. But I want to go much further back than that, to the ancient music of the monks.
In writing what became the Missa Solemnis, Beethoven's intention was to create not just an articulation of faith, not just a glorification of the truth, but a musical presentation of what the Mass really meant to him. He went on an exhaustive search to find the right musical materials to express the fundamental truths of the Mass text. Midway through the Creed, for example, he went back to a thoroughly ancient musical model. Not only is Beethoven deliberately conjuring up the sound of Gregorian chant, he's also working with an ancient musical mode. This is a D minor scale. Here it is again, with no black notes. That is the Dorian mode, a language almost totally unknown in Beethoven's time, except to a handful of scholars. For Beethoven, this sweeping away of musical convention is almost like a ritual purification through which he presents an intensely personal obsession with faith, mortality, and immortality. Listen to what he does on the line Homo factus est, and was made man. We leave the archaic world of the Dorian mode, returning to a glorious D major.
starry heavens above us.
Immanuel Kant.
In creating the Missa Solemnis, Beethoven, knowingly, I think, is making a lasting bequest to the world. It's not arrogant or presumptuous, but it is, nonetheless, a monument to himself and his immortality. And to me, there's one moment in this vast work which is especially important. It's the great fugue at the end of the Credo section, when he sets the text, "I wait for the life of the world to come." This music is borderline unsingable, and that is the point. He creates, through the nigh-on impossible, a palpable sense of striving beyond what any of us can afford to give. In composing this affirmation of faith, Beethoven quite literally pushed himself to the brink.
Beethoven had such belief in the human spirit and for the moral elevation of every member of the human species. That was the thing. Now, some people complain that, that he had too high an opinion of himself and too little of his fellow men, but those of us who counted ourselves among his friends knew that what he wanted was to rise above the sordidness of life, and through his music, to bring the rest of us with him.
Ludwig. He was well into his 50s by then, of course, and known throughout the city as the most famous musician in Europe. But much as they may deny it, the fact is that Viennese taste is neither sophisticated nor elevated. And during those days, the more challenging music of my friend Beethoven was not so much in vogue.
Rossini and his cronies, that's all everybody wants these days. No?
Italians.
It's this paralytic regime. It allows no freedom of expression, no freedom of thought. What?
Walls have ears.
London's the only place to be now, Stefan. You see, the English, they would never tolerate spies. Or censors.
Ludwig, please.
Of course I don't want any wine, Schindler. Doctor's orders. Can't hear, can't drink, can't shit. Thank God poor Beethoven can compose. Eh? Eh?
No, the problem wasn't so much that he was loud, but that he was never discreet, even during those dangerous years after the wars. But somehow he would always get away with it. Perhaps because people started to think that he was going a little crazy, a benign madman. Of course, he was nothing of the sort.
An eccentric, certainly. He could shock people in the street. And in certain details, he was very, very particular. Coffee. for example, his essential nourishment, he would prepare himself. His procedure, worthy of the Orientals, 60 beans precisely, and of course, they had to be counted out.
48, 50, 52.
In 1822, Beethoven received a commission for a new symphony from London's Philharmonic Society. It had been over a decade since he'd written his last, the eighth, but he was in fact already thinking about creating
2 great symphonies, each different from each other, and each different from all my other ones. I dread beginning works of this magnitude, you see. Now, once I've started, it's everything's fine.
Once again, Beethoven was thinking in terms of a pair of symphonies. But continuing ill health prevented him from going to England as he'd hoped, and it wasn't London that saw the premiere of his Ninth Symphony.
Carl's school fees are due.
Schindler, listen to this. Do not allow your latest offspring to appear as foreigners. Appear soon among your friends, your admirers, your venerators. I think that's very beautiful. To put on a concert of my newest works in Vienna. No?
Come on, Schindler. We're going for a walk.
Might actually be able to make some money.
Naturally, there was an immense amount to organize before such a concert could take place. And in that, I was, as always, there to assist.
Well, just tell the scribes to copy my score exactly as I've written it down. And we still need a hall. We better write to Dietrich Stein. See what he...
Writing about the opening of the Ninth Symphony is how the music emerges from nothing, from the dawn of time, as it were. And this sense of high drama was enthusiastically seized upon by many later composers. Out of the darkness, there shall be light.
Dietrich Stein says no. Well, then find another hall, Schindler.
His expenses. I mean, the copyist bills alone. How many copyists do we need?
Fine. Then, Schindler, tell them that I asked them to copy out the words and the music as they were written, and I find they've done almost exactly the opposite. It's almost as though they've done it on purpose.
Of course they can play it. And we must make sure they get the speeds right. It's an excellent invention, isn't it?
Very useful.
We've been at it for weeks. Day and night with that fawning, vulgar wretch, Schindler. I'm as roasted as this veal. But wait till you hear it, Stephanie. Wait till you hear it.
The premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony would become a milestone in musical history. With this massive work, Beethoven raised Western music to an unprecedented level of urgency, power, and meaning. In its final movement, in the most direct and public way, he would share his belief in humankind and a universal brotherhood through a setting of Schiller's Ode to Joy. For the first time, a symphony included voices. Nearly 200 years after it was written, this symphony remains the ultimate musical symbol of our faith in an inclusive world. And it's an appalling irony that the one person excluded from that utopian moment of its premiere was the composer himself.
I don't think he heard a note of it. He even needed me to tell him how often the audience had burst into applause. How the police commissioner had to quieten them between movements. How there was not the slightest disturbance in the quietest passages. But I never expected him to be so moved by such a reception.
This concert closed a chapter in Beethoven's life. It was his last public appearance in Vienna and his last public statement as a composer.
Beethoven's inexhaustible genius has shown us a new world
revealing magical secrets of a holy art which we had never before heard or even imagined.
But it didn't make me any money, did it? Schindler, your presence irritates me. I don't want you sitting at my table.
Go!
Yes, the concert was a success. But he made much less money than he had hoped. And he thought I had cheated him. So for a while I didn't work for him, which was unfortunate, because he had only his nephew to take my place.
Of course, I'll be needing some blotting paper, some chocolate, some of my bowels. Get them when you go into town.
But I've got to study.
Of course you've got to study. Gained in life without diligence?
Nothing.
Nothing.
You have no idea.
Unless, of course, you prefer to squander the hours, all your evenings with that nine-mates. The billiard table, drinking, probably whores. Keep up!
Beethoven got no better in that respect as he grew older. Suspicious, jealous, easily offended, easily hurt, easily angered, and yet still so full of warmth and trust and generosity.
And you'll be going this evening, drinking or gambling?
Of course, it was much harder for Karl than the rest of us. After nearly 10 years of existing between those extremes, he couldn't possibly have known just how much his uncle cared for him.
Money from this apartment.
Now, it must be examination time soon.
Money? Yes, sir, in 2 weeks.
Well, good luck.
Real poverty, of course, always deserves our sympathy, but that young man, he lacks both poise and manners. Who's different? Oh, where's my little baby? Little trouser button.
Was sweet.
He's cruel! And he's common. He doesn't deserve your friendship. I have to go. Where are you going? Come back! Come back! You'll be back here at 8 o'clock in the morning! I've got things for you to do!
Terrible, having a child. Catherine? Do something for me. Take the boy out one evening and see if he's any good at billiards. Hmm?
After the huge canvases he'd used for the Mass and the Ninth Symphony, Beethoven now turned back to the most intimate musical form. In his final group of 5 string quartets, Beethoven was determined to take the form as far as it could go. And I think these pieces prove that he wasn't the first great romantic, as the history books often term him, but rather the last great classicist. It's as if he's saying, I represent the end of the road for the classical string quartet, and beyond me, there's only an abyss. Anybody who wants to write a string quartet now will have to find a new way. He's deliberately closing a chapter in musical history. The great B-flat major quartet is built from a sequence of 6 movements rather than the usual 4. It focuses on extremes of contrast both within and between movements, and extremes were exactly what characterized his relationship with Karl.
I mean, you don't know what it's like. Endless demands. And I'm never good enough. His son must be exceptional. And I'm not. And then there's my mother. I mean, she's my mother.
Lying to me, don't lie to your father. This is your mother's poison still in you. What? You've no idea the sacrifice it takes to become a decent human being. Just get out! Go and get out! Karl! Karl! Come back, Karl. Don't do this to your father. Your father that loves you.
The absolute extreme of Beethoven's aggressive brutality exists, for me, in the last movement of this B-flat quartet. The Grosse Fuge is a relentless 15-minute assault on both the performers and the audience. In its insanely ambitious technical demands, it was also an assault on the composer. In his uncompromising self-expectation, we can hear Beethoven doing to himself exactly what he did to Karl.
That monster that spawned you! Stop it!
I shall never forget his face when he told me. My Karl has shot himself. The grief he felt was indescribable. What made it worse was that when they found the boy, he asked for his mother.
What reason did you have? Tired of life. You are tired of life? My uncle tormented me too much. He tried to make me a better person. He only made me worse. Tell my uncle I want to hear nothing about my mother that is derogatory.
When Karl left hospital 2 months later, Beethoven's response was unusually well judged. He took him to the country to recuperate, and for the first time allowed him to decide on his own future, a career in the army. It was during this visit that Beethoven wrote his last piece of music, a new final movement for the B-flat quartet to replace the Grosse Fuge, which had so bewildered audiences and been pronounced unplayable by professionals. Having gone to the absolute extreme, Beethoven was now ready to pull back. In this brilliantly witty movement, the work finds a gentler resolution. Through this ultimate crisis, I think, Beethoven had finally found some sense of personal equilibrium.
Karl recovered, and he was due to join his regiment. They arrived back in Vienna in the middle of winter, after a terrible journey in an open carriage. Well, I could see straight away how ill Ludwig was. He'd caught pneumonia. But he'd been ill so often over the past 10 years, none of us suspected that he would hardly leave his bed again.
It is Diabelli sent me. This is the house that Haydn was born in. Such a great man. Such a humble little place. Where shall we put it? Shall I put it there? My car? Gerhard? What do you think of my Karl in his uniform? From the Prussian king, I had hoped for a decoration.
No decoration could make you greater than you are without it.
After Karl left, it was one thing after another. And there was an operation attempted to relieve the great quantity of fluid that had collected in his abdomen. And the procedure only drained the fluid, it didn't stop it from coming, so the wound had to be kept open. But it became infected. He suffered appallingly.
The strength for another operation.
Laudite amici. Comedy finite est.
What did he say?
Applaud, my friends. The comedy is over.
By the 24th of March 1827, aggressively advancing liver disease and kidney failure left Beethoven in a coma. 2 days later, in the middle of a thunderstorm, he died. Within hours of his death, a monumental mythology was already starting to take shape around him. The world wanted to take possession of Beethoven. 2 days after he died, souvenir hunters removed every last lock of hair from his head. The day after that, over 20,000 people attended his funeral, the largest that had ever been held in Vienna. Karl, stationed in Moravia, did not return for the ceremony. No one composer has had such an overwhelming impact upon musical history. The vast explosion of musical development across the 19th century simply could not have been without Beethoven. To me, it's very clear that he closed the chapter called Classicism, making it not just possible, but essential that from now on, composers must follow their own path.
During BBC 4 now, Hazelwood unravels one of Beethoven's finest works, phrase by phrase.